you're at that point classically playing, practicing for 14, 15 hours a day, it's pretty intense. And I guess some people choose to go this way or that way.
Hold on, so you're telling me you practiced for 14, 15 hours a day on the one instrument?
Yes.
KILLA Podcast. KILLAofficial.com.
THTC, the UK's leading ethical streetwear label. Organically grown and ethically built garments from hemp, organic cotton, and other sustainable materials. 2019 is their 20th anniversary year. Join me with THTC as a KILLA podcast sponsor celebrating music, social activism, hemp, and street culture. THTC, eco-fashion redefined since 1999. Beatbox created.
KILLA.
And we're here to talk about world music and street culture.
KILLA Podcast.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Reporting from the sunny backyard of our villa in Bali, courtesy of a fish owl. I'm here with some new friends of mine. KILLA Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe. Big shout out to our people's graffiti kings. Yeah, not so central London with N Kutcher from Australia. Now, I have no doubt we're about to introduce some people to these characters, and believe me, after a good 48 hours of hanging out, it's been a fucking pleasure, boys. How are we?
You can start off if you want.
Doesn't get much better, really. It's been, again, Team Official, shout out. They have put us all up here in this wonderful villa. Bali's obviously a bit closer for us Aussies than our English counterparts. And we have been here numerous times, but it has been a lovely few days, and we've had lots of musical chats and industrial chats and industry chats. Yeah, industry chats. Yeah. Thanks for having us.
I guess to introduce who we are, so my name is Matt. This is Adam. And we are a DJ, producer, instrumental duo from Australia. We write music, we play music, we perform music. Our backgrounds are as a pianist and a drummer, which we have somehow met halfway and ended up making electronic music. So that's where we are, and where we go next, I guess we'll find out.
I mean, we're working with the dynamics here. It's one microphone business for this particular chat, and I think we do a lot of these. And one thing that I like is coming out on location. Do you know what I mean? Like the whole vibe and just getting to know people from their part of the world and how it differs. And one thing that I have experience in. Well, common knowledge is the industry as a whole, and the conversations we've been having around the pool about,
Some we can't repeat.
Yeah, yeah. There's some things that we can't repeat, but but it's interesting how doesn't matter what walk of life, what level pegging you are, or who you're above, or whatever with the music industry, there certainly is a very strong commonality of what we go through as artists. Where are you guys based? You're based out of Australia, but you're not both together, are you? It's two different areas of the country.
Yeah, we.
So, dear Matthew left the unbeatable town of Brisbane for slightly more tumultuous weather in Melbourne.
God damn it!
So yes, both from Australia, originally both from Brisbane. That's how we met. But I think the separate city thing hasn't affected us too much. I suspect if it was 20 years ago, we would not be able to do what we do, but everything's done online these days, and everything's shared and everything's texted, and I think if anything, it's benefited us because you're happier in Melbourne.
Yeah, it's for those who've not ventured to Australia before, Brisbane is located in Queensland, which is known as the Sunshine State for a very good reason. Very warm, and Melbourne is lots of ups and downs and rain and storms and things, but both very different cities. And like Adam said, we meet wherever the gig is. So we make it work.
Does it? I mean, I guess creatively online, it doesn't matter so much anymore. Like you can, as long as you've got yourself a good internet connect, and Zoom is in the house. You know what I mean? So you can do loads of different things. But I don't know. Did you ever watch that Tribe Called Quest documentary where they were talking about Fife moving to Atlanta and stuff? There's a kinship. Has that affected you guys in the the vibe of being in a room together and coming up with things on a more spontaneous level? Does that come into play when you're apart?
What's interesting about us as creatives is we both work super differently. So I guess speaking on behalf of both of us here, and Adam will, I guess, tell you his part. I would say, Adam, more likely you're someone who enjoys the process of writing in a group situation, and as someone who's come from band world, being in a room with a bunch of people and all writing as a team, whereas I think I've come from more being solo and being individual, locked away in a dark room on a computer and liking the solitude of that. So I think that, no, I mean, creatively, the distance doesn't really make any difference because we have very different processes. So I think at some point in the birth or journey of a record, when those processes meet, that's cool. But initially, when it's ideas time, it probably doesn't matter.
It's interesting you say that. Like, there's so many duos out there of heritage and legacy, like Stanton Warriors. They have that dynamic, and so does Basement Jacks. I think there is something to be said about having the more spontaneous, sociable character that throws in ideas intermittently within a more structured your process of thinking. It kind of like it's a weird juxtaposition, and I'm sure there's a lot of pulling and pushing that goes on in amongst that as well, right?
I think, music aside, the greatest juxtaposition is Matt and I actually as humans and people and personality. A very, very non-technical way to put it, if you don't mind me saying, Matt. Matt loves the laptop in the jocks on his bed, headphones on, and first of all, I can't stand trackpads, and it frustrates me. And I'm very much a desk, a mouse, speakers. I understand that headphones can give you lots of ranges that speakers can't, but I don't like. I like the sound around.
I actually thought where you were going with that was how we both prefer to party, but that's a different angle.
Yeah, it's slightly above G-rated. Yeah, so I think it our yin and yang, so to speak, has developed, and will continue to for forever in the rest of our career. And there will be times when we do have studio sessions, and I think we both hope for lots and consecutive studio sessions where we are just the two of us, or preferably the two of us with other people in a room. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about both ways of doing it.
It's safe to say as well that we're both equipped to do the other. So like, if there comes a point where Adam's got to sit in on 6 hours of refining a snare drum, may not prefer to do it, but he can do it. And if it comes down to me needing to write with a group of people in a room, also can do it. So it's not first preference, but we can both kind of switch when we need, I guess.
Mix and match and switch it up. Right. I mean, just to get a little bit a backline on this, like, as characters, you're very versatile in your music. Now, we'll put all the links in and get people to discover this. From a European British point of view, which predominantly this podcast is I think it's key to kind of like delve into like your guys' backstory, and which I hope this podcast will represent. Let's rewind it a little bit and let's look into where it began. How did this all come about? From the jump, who wants to take
this project, or us individually as musicians? Well, do you want to tell your part first as a drum man?
So, I was in grade 5 and I joined the concert band, as you do, and I was in the percussion section, but I was a very perhaps ignorant or arrogant percussionist, and I didn't want to learn the xylophone, and I didn't want to learn notes because I didn't need to know them, because I wanted to hit the drum. And then, of course, after a year, Mum said she'd buy me a drum kit. So I did that and got to the lessons and did high school and joined metal bands. I got into metal. My teacher at the time, he showed me a wonderful band called Parkway Drive, which you'll even know about because they're now one of the biggest bands in the world from Byron Bay. Yes. And so from that, my progression into electronic music, I think, may have been similar to a lot of older band guys in the sense that my attitude was always, why would I ever go see someone standing up there pressing play? Like, that's not right. That's not real. And then, you know, I found Matt and discovered this whole world, and now I love all versions of electronic music as much as I love bands. And I think that's really special, and I think that background, just as Matt will explain his, can be attributed a lot to what we do and come up with.
And then, mine was I started playing classical piano from a very young age. I think I started when I was about 3 and went through all the grades, and got to a point where I was probably about 16 where I'd sort of reached the highest level of tuition with that, where it was a clear-cut path of either become a professional concert pianist and hit the competition and touring circuit in Europe, or not, because when you're at that point classically playing, you know, practicing for 14, 15 hours a day, it's pretty intense, and I guess some people choose to go this way or that way.
Hold on, so you're telling me you practiced for 14, 15 hours a day on the one instrument?
Yeah, so typically your day would be broken up through different things. So you'd have a certain amount of your day would be scales and rudiments, just really to keep your technique in place. And then there'd be a certain amount of your day which would be just repertoire, so songs that you always keep with you. And then there'd be a certain amount of your day which would be dedicated to learning something new. So if you were going to perform a piano concerto as part of a concert, for the 3 months leading up to that, you'd be memorizing, learning, and perfecting that. So your day was kind of broken up into different aspects. And then there's the music theory, music history, and all those bits.
I'm fucking blown away, bro.
It's a lot of tedious repetition of things. So as a 16-year-old kid, I probably spent more time doing that than I did doing a lot of things. The 16-year-old kids probably did, like, you know, sports or social things or whatnot. So for me, I got the bug of electronic music because I was able to get in and DJ at a couple of nightclubs. I think I heard a bit about DJing in nightclubs just through friends of friends. And fortunately, at the time, I was able to, I guess, use the knowledge I had from music theory to understand how to put together a basic DJ set. I kind of bullshitted my way into my first gigs that I got, very underprepared, rocking up with a bunch of burnt CDs and some iPod headphones, and kind of
Real life. That's what happens,
talked into it. The first guy that ever gave me a DJ gig said, he pulled me off halfway through my set and he goes, "Look, that was terrible, but keep at it. And if it's something you want to do, like, you need to just keep at it." So I did. And to be honest, it was also a fun way to get into nightclubs as an underage kid, because it was a cool thing to do. And so, yeah, I guess I got to that point where I realized that not only was the DJing and electronic production side of things a lot of fun, but it was also a nice transition for me to naturally do, considering I had that music theory training there. It wasn't really like, it was more about just learning to use the decks as opposed to having to relearn the entire thing. But then there was also the music production side of things. My parents always had a computer for their business, and once I learned about, like, basic music software like Fruity Loops and things like that, I just used to enjoy. Mum and Dad had a pretty diverse record collection, and Mum had a lot of rock records like Fleetwood Mac sitting around. Dad had a lot more of the jazz fusion rock stuff like Steely Dan, and a lot of records like that were sort of sitting around. And there was everything from Beck to Van Morrison. They were pretty you know, avid listeners recreationally of music. So I just used to enjoy frigging around with computers, and to be able to, I got a sound card pretty much like this one. I remember connecting their turntable and just cutting bits out of, like, a Stevie Wonder record or this or that. I wasn't ever any good at doing it at the time, but just the ability to manipulate that and make basic hip-hop beats was super cool. So then I guess when those two things met, of, you know, the idea of DJing in a club, but then also the ability to make beats, essentially, it was really cool to mix them together. But I would have to attribute the bulk of the passion and interest in that to hip hop culture, because it was at the time that I started playing, it was never really about dance music or EDM. Like, hip hop was the thing. So yeah, those elements all came together, I think, because of hip hop. And I think the hip hop, for me personally, hip hop represented more of an overall culture, And it was interesting in so many different ways, as opposed to just a genre. You know, it wasn't about one genre; it was about an entire. You know, there's beatboxing and breakdancing, graffiti. There's all these cool things to get into, and it seemed like a judgment-free world. Whereas growing up at school, being very focused on classical music, it was a very judgmental world. Whereas hip hop was the opposite. It was like, you can do whatever you want, and having no barriers was like a super cool thing. So moving forward to us meeting, it was, I guess, me DJing for a bunch of years and playing around with making beats, and then met Adam, and we started our project and started touring and playing shows, having not met for very long. So we'd only known each other for a few months before we started playing shows. And it was an interesting kind of learning curve. But I guess I like to think what we do now on a stage or through music is an end product of all of those things that have kind of come together.
Like I feel like the fusion. I mean, with Adam, we'll definitely get into the drum side of things, but in a similar conversation that we had the other day regarding beatbox, you know my boy Tom Thumb, hold tight Tom Thumb. You done some work with him, right?
Yeah, Tom Thumb was one of those guys where I reckon I would have been like 15 years old, and I just got the bug of hip hop. And in Brisbane, where we're from, the last Sunday of every month, there was a clothing store called Fat Stuff. And it was like Brisbane's major hub for like streetwear and like urban clothing. And they used to close the store on this fourth Sunday of every month, and they'd do beatbox battles and MC battles. And it was just a cool thing. And from a country town city like where we're from, there's nothing else like that. And it was cool that there were a bunch of guys who showed the initiative to create something, you know. And it was a buzz. Like that was probably a bit before, if not just around the time that 8 Mile like hit cinemas. So the whole country was buzzing with hip hop, and that introduced a lot of people to hip hop. So yeah, Tom was someone who he used to go in the beatbox battles. He's a wicked MC. He used to go in the MC battles, and it's been cool watching him grow as an artist, you know, over the years too. It's pretty cool.
He's firing. I love the way he invests so much of his energy on not only like learning new sounds, but he also puts it out there to the public. Hey, you try this. I fucking love that. The whole thing, which I find with you guys in checking out your stuff, we've been playing a bunch of bits and bobs on around the place, and versatility. I think that comes, Adam, I'll throw it your way. You know, the versatility of you guys, obviously from the ground up. Having set skills within real instrumentation, and like you being into metal, you being into hip hop, and classically trained, and you know drum lessons and things like that. It creates such a broad landscape of different genres that you guys bounce around. Has that been challenging for you, both, particularly when throwing it back into the electronic club land, to try and hone in maybe a lining of sound within all those different genres that you guys cover?
Perhaps not a lining of sound, but certainly a lining of how we present the music uniformly as Smashed and Kutcher, I suppose. I just think... I'm not sure how else to...
I would say short answer, yes on that.
Yeah.
Overall. Yeah, it's it's almost hard to have a defined, you know.
And I think the movement from strictly bands and acoustic music into electronic music as it developed was so, you know, I haven't stopped loving bands less. It's just all this new music and artists to love as well. And I think that's really special, and I'm grateful to Matt and everything that we've done, because potentially if I'd just stayed a bartender playing drums in a garage, like maybe I never would have got into electronic music at all. And it's this whole world and hundreds of artists that I now love and appreciate and admire and inspire me. And yeah, I think that's just really all it's about, you know. For music, it's just you are a fan of music, and therefore you start learning it and playing it, and all you can ever hope is that perhaps one day someone will be a fan of yours.
Yeah, with Australia as well, which I really dig. I've toured out there a bunch of times. What I really dig is the timeless enthusiasm of across genres. Like you guys, UK can sometimes be quite fickle in its approach to music. If it's not upfront, if it's not new, I think that is detrimental to generations of music. When you guys, you really draw inspirations as a country, man. I mean, I know it's really kind of broad speaking, but you know what I mean? You turn on the radio and there's a whole bunch of stuff. With UK, it can be quite, you know, it's got to be new, it's got to be this, you know, and there's I don't know, the industry really is overpowering at times.
It's fair to say that with Australia, like that probably, you probably notice that with everything, whether it's the people that live in Australia or our food or our culture or our music, like we're just borrowing bits of kind of everything, you know. We're a satellite country and we're so removed in many ways from the rest of the world. So I guess, yeah, that's what you might hear on the radio or what you might eat when you come to an Australian restaurant is going to be a mix of everything, really. We are very much a country that's built on pub rock. We're built on pubs, we're built on beer, we're built on rock and roll, we're built on Bee Gees and AC/DC and InXS and Jimmy Barnes and John Farnham and all those wonderful things, Cold Chisel. And
Come on.
yeah,
Shit, baby.
yeah, it's cool, and it's interesting because and on the flip side, like when we come to Europe or go to Asia, like we don't see a pub rock culture, you know, like Australia. It's very unique and it is what it is. So as each genre has made its way to Australia, be it dance music or hip hop, whatever, you know, they come and they find their place, but then there's always that foundation of like pub rock, and it's cool. As DJs, it's fun because we can be playing a proper commercial EDM set, playing commercial dance music in a bottle service club, but you can also drop InXS and you know you have the crowd because it's always there as an underlying thing.
Is the culture? Let's go a little bit into the culture of Australia. Like, I mean, you're ringing all these bells are ringing off. Oh yeah, fucking these bands, this band. You know, you guys have got like a lot of history in fucking music, championed as well. Like feels like every time. I mean, I think pub rock is its foundation, but you know, when you think of InXS, you know, AC/DC. You know, it's two obvious ones. You guys fucking champion the shit out of them. It's almost like you're the wind under their sails. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Is there a circuit? Is there? I mean, you talk about pub rock and what's the new band? What's the?
Oh, the Chats.
The Chats,
yeah,
man.
Introduced him to the Chats, so he knows about the Chats now.
Hold tight, the Chat. I mean, dude, I'm gonna as soon as they're in town. They're in town soon, so I'm gonna hit that. But you know, is that the circuit? Is that the culture? Is there is this a real thing? Are there real like old school bars like you'd go down to Austin, Texas, and there's a whole like? Is there a scene for that shit?
To say that you could go to pretty much any pub in Australia, and there will be a couple of blokes or a couple of local bands who are either cover bands who are there every night or every weekend, or they're also there thrown in a couple of originals as well. And I'm sure that there's gold and talent to be found, you know. But there's
Yeah, I was going to say, but now being 2019 with electronic music, you'll also see a little CDJ and a mixer in the back corner as well, you know. And so in a weird way, although Matt and I will never experience what a band like InXS experienced with, you know, 7 nights a week, every Australian pub that you could possibly go to, we experience a very small percentage of that, even as DJs going to Australian pubs that now have CDJs and a mixer.
I fucking love that. I just love that. It's migrated into a palatable place where sociably, like, people can connect with that shit.
You even notice too in like in the last 10 years, you think about all of the classic like Hollywood heavyweights, your Mel Gibsons, your Nicole Kidmans, like it's now shifted. It's acceptable to have an Aussie accent in Hollywood and not have to be putting on an American accent. I think Australian culture in media and in music and in film. I watched an interview the other day of Tarantino, and the interviewer asked him about his favourite Aussie films and directors, and he just went in. Like, he knew so much. And I think definitely in music land, like, there's been enough time now where Aussies have really, like, cemented their own identity as, you know, I think I think being a very young country, it took, and it shows to us when we go to Europe and play shows, like you can feel the culture and the time and the heritage in the types of music and the way crowds receive it. And Australia is so young when it comes to that. But yeah, we're starting to now stamp a bit of an identity, and it's cool. It's nice to see other countries receive that too.
Yeah. I think internet obviously has helped spawn like the attention of globally. I mean, you know, when you take Afrobeat, you know, actually, you know, this is a good point. As artists, I just find, and you mentioned it as well, Adam. The music is music, but it's so key. Like even referring to Tarantino, talking about the things that he's learned. You know, he's just done his fucking homework, and that is so important for artistry, no matter where you are in the world, isn't it?
And, you know, I think just biologically on a timeline, Australia is obviously so young. And even just some of the buildings that we see in Europe, it's like, oh, you can't even fathom that that's existed for that long, you know, when our entire country hasn't. And, yeah, I think it just, yeah, as Matt said, it's as more time passes, there will be more and more cementing of Australia. And, yeah, we've had enough people in the arts and successful Australians now across all aspects of art to say, you know, like, yeah, good things can come out of Australia, and pay attention.
For real. Now on the subject of social media and whatnot, and the broadening expansion of like the world ever getting smaller. You were with Apple for a period of time, right? You worked for them, and yeah, we was in the cab the other day just chatting away, and I found your intel, your understanding of like how it works in those bigger machines. I found it incredibly insightful, and yeah, I'd like to kind of like circle just for the bovine out there that might be a little bit, well, you know, what the fuck goes on in those worlds? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think, ironically, like I find a lot of my time weekly consumed in tech and marketing as two separate things and combined. And I think those two things can be super beneficial to a career as a music act. But then ironically, like, actually probably the most helpful thing to a music act is to try and ignore those things, you know, and actually go back to the roots of writing a good song, nice, you know. Yeah, and it's a constant battle for me to be keeping front of mind, you know, how important tech and data and marketing and social media is. But at the end of the day, like, as Adam's always drummed into me, like, writing a good song can bypass all that, you know. And suddenly, instead of you using those things to push yourself, those things automatically work for you if you've got the good song there. But writing a hit record is everyone's dream, and not as easy as it.
We'd all do it.
Yeah, we would have done it.
I think, yeah, and I'm very grateful to obviously have met someone like Matt who is tech savvy and who I would say is passionate about social media and that kind of stuff, because, you know, I like to pride myself as a, you know, still that kid who loved bands and listened to the CDs that his dad put on. And yeah, I don't like to use, you know, it doesn't necessarily taint it, but as Matt said, you do have to remember, you know, at the end of the day, what are we? We're just two blokes that found instruments that we loved, and somehow we got here. And so you've got to accept that these things are so necessary and important for what we do, but if we don't have the initial things that got us there in the first place, it's not going to work together.
Bro, like, you hit the nail on the head. I say this sometimes, I might have said it in a couple of podcasts, but, you know, it took JayZ Hard Knock Life to pretty much own New York. You know, I guess it's what you do with the accolades and the acclaim once you've done that. But all too often, I guess back in the 80s and 90s, it was almost like getting caught up in your own hype. Yeah. That made you lose your identity in your way, and, you know, what did I do to get here? You know what I mean? The voice, the instruments and stuff. But nowadays, I think it's more people get lost in the social presence, the tech, the back end.
Another form of hype.
A thing as well too, and this is not at all to call out Australia as a country, and I'm sure that happens in other places, but I kind of find that Australia culturally is often sometimes a bit wary to back its own things. And like I see it a lot in hip hop culture, like, you know, the artists that, you know, go on to do big things, they've had success in their hometown, whether it was like JayZ in New York, Kanye in Chicago, like writing with your hometown is like, that's how you get that next step. Whereas in Australia, sometimes for us just observing, like it can work the other way. Like there might be a state or an area of Australia where we don't have a lot of support, but then we go and play shows in India and like are super well received. Or like we'll go and do shows somewhere in America and they absolutely love it, but you know, maybe we don't see that level of support in Australia. So I don't know, it's interesting.
What about from a what's so not or flume point of view? Like we were saying the other day, they were spearheaded in Sydney. Is Sydney a revered place for? Is that where the industry is? Because I always think Melbourne when I think of the arts and that more San Francisco side of like bohemian. You know what I mean?
It's definitely a hub, and there's a string of successful artists who've come from Sydney, so I can't really argue with that. There are a lot of anomalies as well that I can't remember where Tones and I came from, but like there's a lot of one-offs that pop out of country towns and pop out of, you know, smaller regional areas too. So Sydney tends to be like a bit of a hub for, you know, if you're going to springboard out of Australia, that's usually, I mean, the record labels are based there, the publishers are based there, probably the touring companies mostly are based there. Yeah, so yeah, Sydney would be the closest thing Australia would have to LA in terms of that culture. So it does make sense.
But Melbourne has the most intensive, ridiculous, non-stop clubbing culture out of all the cities in Australia. So, you know, goes both ways.
If you want to go out till 11 a.m. and listen to techno, probably go to Melbourne. That's the spot.
I'm saying like I love Melbourne for. Like again, it's a bohemian vibe. It's Bristol. It's Venice Beach. It's San Francisco. It's got a lot of that energy to it, hasn't it? Like the arts.
Melbourne's got some stuff. Look up Rainbow Serpent Festival. There's some absolute wild like bush doofs around Melbourne.
Rainbow
Serpent. There's a whole bunch. I couldn't name them all, but there's around Melbourne area. There's a stack of festivals like out in the dirt, and it's proper like Burning Man vibes and colourful dragons and psytrance and techno, and there's some cool stuff.
Sick, that's sick. Well, listen, I know you guys have got flights. We're really catching the tail end of this shit right here. Yeah. I know, bro. Like I've done this before, right? I had DJ Target on. And he nearly missed his Radio 1 slot. You just end up going down these rabbit holes of conversation. We could do it forever. But what's popping? What's going on? What's the future?
Where do we start? New music coming, new music out. As we touched on before, there's a whole bunch of different types of music. So we're making some pop punk EDM stuff. We're making some hard dance records. We're making some... we're making a whole bunch of different types of things. So if you have never heard of us before, welcome to our weird little world. And look us up. And if you find a song in there amongst our vast array of genres that you enjoy, good for you.
Yeah. So 2020, new music. We're going to up the live show in regard visually, and I've got a new smaller acoustic drum kit, which is much more portable. And yeah, if you a bit more time in America as well next year, hopefully, I try and sort of get in on the ground level and build a strong fan base there, and hopefully over to Europe as we sort of get a few more sort of club orientated records that the Europeans will get around. And yeah, so stay tuned and come to a show and say hello.
There you go, see, KELA Podcast, and he brings it to you first, man. Keep your eyes on the prize, all right? Adam and Matt, Mashed and Kutcher. And listen, thank you so much for holding tight, all right? It's a sunny day over here. I hope it's sunny wherever you are, all right? KELA Podcast, subscribe. Do not sleep, I repeat. Do not sleep on my repeat. Thanks so much, boys.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Serves you both right, all right? Enjoy your flights. Take care of yourselves. Peace.
AG Dentistry. In my line of work, not only does what I do with the mouth get reviewed, it's also my instrument. And it's beyond important to me that my teeth get the professional service they deserve. The AG family provide expert dentistry, whether it's NHS or cosmetic. They're the finest in London. Head over to agdentistry.co.uk for more information on treatments and prices. AG Dentistry.